So it gives me great honor and pleasure to do this interview with Dr. Silvia Bénard. When did we meet, Silvia? I was trying to go back to, I was thinking it was
Wow.
ICQI 2012, 2013, but then I thought doing autoethnography for some reason. Do you remember when we met?
I don't remember. No. It was probably then. It was probably,
ICQI?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it for sure was an ICQI, but I don't know exactly the year.
Yeah. I went through the programs I was looking for when you started and when we met.
When I started going.
Yeah, I went through all.
Yeah.
So
It's been a while. It's been a while.
It has, yeah. So let me tell you all a little bit about Silvia. She has a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. She is a professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Universidad Autónoma de Aguascalientes in Mexico. Much of her research focuses on identity and subjectivity, migration, immigration, nationality, place, politics, the ethics of doing autoethnography, and family relations, generations, and trauma. By my count, she has published 4 books and more than 30 articles and chapters, including the 2019 Autoethnografía, una metodología cualitativa, an open access book translated from English to Spanish of key readings in autoethnography, and the 2020 Voices desde la Diversidad, an open access collection of autoethnographic essays written by students. There's so much that I admire and appreciate about Silvia. She's been a fierce advocate for doing and supporting autoethnography. And I know she's had to justify her autoethnographic work for others, especially for stale and sterile academic bureaucracies. On a visit to her university and with her in October 2019, I witnessed the pragmatic and honest care and camaraderie she has with students, always pushing them to pursue projects and opportunities and to live kind, just, and meaningful personal and professional lives. And I connect with and take comfort in her ruminations and writings about her family, particularly her ability to demonstrate how and why familial relations can be complicated. As someone with continually strained family of origin relationships myself, the questions Silvia asks and engages in her work resonate so much with me. And then I want to mention Silvia's translation work. With all of our publications, we often only encounter that finished project, and yet there's so much more work that happens behind the scenes. The several drafts, the multiple tiers, the arranging and rearranging of content, and then most likely receiving accommodating and hopefully helpful and not too harsh feedback. Let's add translation to the mix, a delicate and difficult task in which an author maneuvers multiple languages, but by deciphering synonyms, verbs, jargon, determining an author's intentions and intended meanings, and then representing these meanings in another linguistic system. Silvia has done this work and has done a lot of this work. And I don't think I can identify another autoethnographer who is engaged in such extensive translation practices for the benefit of Spanish and English speakers and scholars. Finally, and related to translation, I often think about Silvia when I think about access to our work. How can we make our work more increasingly accessible to others and to other languages? I often find myself asking, how would Silvia make this better? What would Silvia do? So for all of these tasks, for all of these reasons and these accomplishments, I want to say, Silvia, thank you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Tony, and thanks for having me here.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Great. I'm so excited for this session. So here's what I thought we would do with this session. I have some questions I would like to ask Silvia. spend about 30 minutes. Let's see where we go, where the conversation takes us, and then open it up to hear comments and questions you also might have for Silvia, or some love or some praise, and whatever you would like to offer, even critique if you'd like to go there. Please don't be shy. This is our time with the Silvia Bénard. So just to get us started, when I was going through your past work, something I was noticing in your early work, especially from the late 80s and 90s, that a lot of your early work, especially in sociology, focused on macro level issues related to religion, politics, and national identity. And it seems that this early work was so much less personal, less micro, compared to the work from the mid 2000s on. Why did this shift occur? How and why did you come to this world of autoethnography? What were some of these moments and thoughts you had with yourself?
Well, it's a lot of time, so many years. Yeah. I think it has to do with where I studied. I studied in a Mexican university that was very much into structural stuff, very Marxist, very strong Marxist tradition. And then when I studied my PhD in Austin, I tried to do a lot of sociological theory courses, and I kept on working on more macro stuff, although I started going into more cultural kind of subjects, trying to get into them, which was my major interest that had to do with what we could call social psychology. Being there, I started shifting. It was the 1980s. When I got there, it was the beginning of the 1980s, a long time ago. And there was not much qualitative stuff. Most Mexican students that went to UT ended up at the Population Research Center, which I knew I didn't want to be there, but that was the place where I was assigned to. So I had to do a lot of census translation and working with lots of demographers, until I finally met my master's thesis advisor, who was my mentor, Gideon Schoberg, the guy from the Case for the Case study.
Okay, yeah.
And he was a real important person in my life. So I did my master's thesis with him. I wrote a case study about the relationship between church and state, using the post visit as a case. It was a case study. And I kept on trying to move towards the direction of at least culture, although it was very macro. But what made the big change was when I moved to Aguascalientes, the city where I live now, and experiencing things that I had studied as a sociologist, but had never experienced myself as an ordinary common person, a woman. So I tried to understand Aguascalientes from using those more macro theories and even urban sociology. And then I ended up doing grounded theory. I met Juliet Corbin and I ended up doing grounded theory for a while. And I think it helped a lot, but it didn't really help me understand where I was standing until I started writing about my own experience. And that was at the same time that I was doing interviews using grounded theory. And then I met Caroline. I went to the research doc workshops, and I met Caroline, and I met Bud Woodall, and I realized that was something I could do. It was legitimate to do that. When I did that, and showed it to close people, close friends of mine. They said it was pop psychology, pop sociology, pop sociology. And then from then on, I decided to go on and do autoethnography. And that's why, but I think the big change was because I experienced sociology myself. You know, I always saw sociological problems as being removed from them because my personal biography was very different from most Mexican women in my age. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Do you still do some of that more traditional work, or do you still use these software programs? Do you?
Cesar is around, huh? No, not anymore. I worked on it. I really tried to use grounded theory. I think it's easy to get lost on that. And I used the program that Cesar translated, the Max QDA.
Yeah.
And I have used it, and people here use not Max QDA, but they use Atlas T. That it's very, very common here in my university, and I think in other Latin American universities. But no, I don't do that anymore.
Okay. I have to tell you, there was a reason I asked that question. We just received a manuscript at the Journal about a month ago that was at the Journal of Autoethnography that written by some more established scholars that didn't include any personal experience, and it was a report of using Atlas T to analyze their personal experiences, and they were framing it as auto. And I'm like, ooh, this is. Yes, we're squirming. Yeah. What's been if you could identify one or a few of your favorite or most meaningful autoethnographic projects that you've worked on, what would you say to that?
Well, I think the first one it took many years for me to write, which is in Spanish, called Atrapada en Provincia, that talks about my journey of learning to live in a small, middle-sized city in Mexico, being from a big city. And that was very meaningful because I could really see how much autoethnography could make a difference in terms of how much you understand things that happen to you. You know, it was through my personal experience that I could understand more macro stuff, sociological, cultural, political. So for me, it was a long process. I was surprised that the university accepted to publish my book. Yeah. I think I could have worked on it. I wish I have the energy to do a revision, which would be, I would change things, and I could would probably be more careful with things I said. But that was a turning point for me professionally, very, very important turning point.
Do you think you'll revisit that? You don't think you will?
I may have the energy. I don't know if I have the energy. I hope I do.
Very nice. Was that your first book?
No.
Oh no, you have several. You have more books.
I have other other books. Yeah, on poverty, on the political transition. My dissertation was on political transition in Mexico, and it's published too.
Okay.
Yeah, I have other stuff. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I was trying. I was like, oh, is this a book?
Never mind. No, it's okay. It's okay.
Is there a work that has made you feel very exposed or vulnerable? That I don't want to say that just you feel sort of my life is out there? I mean, is this book your book, or is there other works? Would you?
That's probably the one, because it's written in Spanish and it's long.
Yeah.
And I live in a small city, small enough for people
Right.
to know who I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, what I have done is that that's why I decided to write more in English. Even the last chapter you have, it was like, oh, let's write it in English. Estefania and I decided to write it in English.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a way to keep it hidden from the Spanish-speaking community, but it's tricky.
So there's an I mean, I want to hop into some translating, but I'm here. I mean, there's an ethical. I mean, it's not the same, but it's engaging the similar. I'm hearing this, and it feels like a similar kind of path as some folks go to fiction to bypass, or not bypass, but to accommodate ethical considerations. But I'm hearing like there's a thread of translation that seems that there's an ethical component, that you publish in English so others can't access it because of ethical reasons. Is that some of the work? Is that an accurate interpretation? Or
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And when I published the book in Spanish, the Atrapada en Provincia, I didn't present it. You know, it's a tradition here in Mexico that you present the books. And I didn't want to make a presentation here because I didn't want people to be talking about who's who, you know. Wow. That was not the intention of the book. The intention of the book was to show how hard it is for a woman who comes from a more metropolitan, open society to live in a more traditional city, and show what had been the challenges and of this process. And I didn't want to blame anybody, you know.
Yeah.
But I needed to write my story. So when it came to publish it, I decided it's okay, I can publish it, but I won't use it much within the university, with people, with students, with professors. But of course, it didn't work. With years, as years passed, people knew more and more about that. And even now, I had a PhD student, and she said, I call my ex-husband he, and she says, I need to find out who's that he. And I told her, you know, that's not the point. It doesn't matter who he is. What I wanted, I went on and on. And 15 days later, you know, it's like, Silvia, I know who he is. It's like, what? So yeah, it's a way to try to keep things not hurting other people.
Sure. Have you, I mean, this is one of you've written about this a fair amount with your autoethnographic work, and some of the collections that I've worked with you on. What have been, I mean, you one of your chapters uses the word consequences, but when I hear consequences, I don't necessarily, that's sort of tinged with a negativity with it. But what have been the effects of publishing? What have been your responses? What have been the you know, I hear that story about, you know, this student finding who this your ex is. Have there been, you know, I want to say, okay, and, you know, have there been things that have happened? Have there been conversations, relationships that have been affected by your work and what you've said about some of the folks in your work, or that you've experienced?
Well, most of them have been very positive, very positive, very understanding. The people who took the time to read it or ended up reading it for one reason or another were very supportive and understanding. It was it really allowed us to talk and to discuss things in a more sociological way, if you want to say it.
Okay.
Others did not react that well, very few, very few. And the major problem, as you know, with the article I wrote for the book you edited, was mostly my mother and my daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mother, I mean, she didn't like it, but she complained and she said, okay. But my daughter goes up and down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was this were those acts, I'm thinking of your mother especially, was there I forgot this if you mentioned this, did you willingly share this with her? Or was this an accidental, somebody found it and shared it?
No, I did, but once it was published. And I gave her the book, but I didn't expect her to read the whole thing, but she did.
Wow.
And she was very Catholic, and I thought she was very conservative until I came to Aguascalientes and I found women much younger than I am who were far more conservative than my mother. So I talk about that.
Yeah.
My mother ended up arguing with my gynecologist because he told my husband to change rooms while I was taking care of my baby, because he had to go to work and we wouldn't let him go to sleep, And my mother was furious. And for me, it was like, it was hard to understand.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that in the book, and she said, and then I talk about her being very religious, because I'm the only one that didn't get married by the church. And I said, my father understood. And he said, well, what's your mother going to say? And she didn't know until she read the book. So she said, so I'm this church rat. And I didn't know what to say.
Sure.
Because I think she really resented that I didn't get married by the church. But it was not that bad. It was not that bad. It's my daughter. But we agreed I'm not going to talk about her in my autoethnographies, and that should be okay, at least for these years.
Yes.
We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned some of the aspects of when you do translation work, and you've done quite a bit of translation work. What can you discuss any joys or frustrations in doing this work? You brought up the ethical part. I could see that as a joy and a frustration. Are there other things that complicate this, or that excite you, or that?
I have really struggled with how to connect the worlds of English. There is so much stuff done in English. And I wish autoethnography were more used and more popular in Mexico and in Latin America. Mm-hmm. So I have really thought about how to go about it. And I thought one way to do it was to do translations, at least basic stuff. Because it happens, to me, it has happened a lot, like what you were saying with the Journal of Autoethnography. They say it's autoethnographic because she wrote her story, Mm-hmm. And while Silvia writes stories, and she says, no. So I wish I could make it come across as something that's very relevant. It has epistemological and methodological consequences, and it has to do a lot with how you produce knowledge in the university settings, from the sociology of knowledge position. And I try, but it's really it's not easy. And it's also not easy because it connects with other traditions that are not like the ones that are more common in the US where it originated. So I thought that could be a way to do it. And I still do it even for my students, like I've translated chapters of Caroline's book, The Ethnographic Eye, or I have translated a Laurel's chapter on the trash on the corners. And I cannot publish them or cannot use them because it's not legal, But I still think that we have a long way to go on that direction. But it's too much. It's very expensive. Like the book that we translated, we paid a lot of money to the editing houses to
get permissions to do that.
To get permissions, yeah.
To get permissions, wow.
We paid half of the cost of the book was paid on permissions. Yeah, so that's a big stone.
Yeah. Do you think you've made some? Do you feel? I think you have, and I would assume your students think you have. But do you think you've made some progress with getting autoethnography more understood, differently accepted, by way of your translations? Do you feel it? Do you feel that your good stuff's happened because of that?
Yeah. It's partly cool. that book, that's open access book.
Yeah.
You can't imagine how many people I get alerts every day that people who have read it from all over the place, different places in Latin America, Spain, even in the US. So that's really neat to know that people are taking advantage of that, and that I'm doing something so that people do autoethnographic work that's more than just telling your story or what they think telling your story. A couple of months ago, I talked to a professor that told a student she couldn't use her experience because she decided not to do autoethnography. So she says, once you said you were going to do autoethnography, you didn't use autoethnography, so forget about yourself. You have to focus on your interviews and use grounded. She used a lot of grounded theory, but it was like, it's really hard. We have a long way to go. But I think I've taught a lot of students. I've been the advisor in a few dissertations and master's theses. Here are my students, like Stefania and Bere. And I think I've done what I've found possible. So
related to that, I'll ask the second part after that, but what's that advice? What advice do you give your students who are considering it or who think they want to use autoethnography? Are there things that you say to them, or you expect of them, maybe even require of them to do this work?
Well, I try to respect their processes. Some of them, I become their advisor and they are not have not planned to use autoethnography. And sometimes they do use autoethnography, like Magda with her study on fat women. And but I try not to impose it on them. And once they do it, I try to be there for the process, because we know it can be a very painful process. And what you were telling me on your email in terms of, I'm not the therapist, how do I deal with their epiphanies? So I try to be there. And if things get very tough, I suggest therapy. Some of them go, some others don't. And here in Mexico, it's turned to be that students have to go very fast through their PhDs and their master's programs because they have a scholarship. If they don't finish, they have to pay it back. So it has to be a process different from, when I was in the US, it took me forever and nobody cared of course, I had to pay tuition and I had to see what I could do. But here, if you don't, you get in trouble. So sometimes I wish they had dealt with more things about what it means to be whatever they're working on, like Magda on fatness, or another student that I had on cisgender love relationships. But I try to respect the process and to accept that as far as they went, it's okay. You know, they really work with themselves and with the writing and dealing with stuff and coming out with explanations and making that process of going from their experience to the sociological, cultural, and political implications. So I try to acknowledge that, although I wish they were more. Sometimes they would go further on their inquiries, but I think that's okay.
Okay.
So
yeah. What do you have any last question? We'll open it up to see what other folks say. Do you have any advice from the perspective, you know, not from the student perspective, but from your perspective as the professor, as the advisor, as the mentor? Do you have are there things that you would tell others who say, if you're going to teach a class on autoethnography, be prepared for yesterday, I think did you say that yesterday in a session where you said that we aren't therapists?
We're not therapists. Yeah.
We're not therapists.
Yeah.
And that's what made me think of, you know, that's something I do take into a lot of my autoethnographic when I teach and work with students.
Particularly with undergrads. I'm teaching an undergrad course now.
Yeah.
And I don't have very many students. I have 11 students, but they all come with their stories and they're dealing with complicated things. And it's how to go about keeping close to them and not riding them to the dark side. I don't know how to say it. Yeah. So it's really hard try to remain human and remain accompanying them and being there for them without being their therapist.
Sure.
So I think it's an art. I don't know. I hope they've seen it as they have been through the process, like Bere and Estefania were through the process for a long time. And I think they would know what to do if they taught the class, but it's something you do on an everyday basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for this. I'd like to open up the session for folks to either offer some remarks, some questions, some thoughts. You can go to chat if you're comfortable with that. You can go on camera, whatever your says are. Go for it.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Cesar. Qué milagro.
Hi. Milagro to see you. It's fine. Hey, Silvia, just because I think it is important. I mean, because you mentioned research talk activities in New York, and I remember that you told me that you had gone to New York probably in 2005 or 2002 to attend to my workshop, or even the workshop that I was conducting with Ray Mayera on qualitative computing, of course. But I told you, please, Silvia, don't waste your time. It is better if you attend Caroline's workshop or Bud Goddard's workshop, remember? And I remember pretty well that you did it. I mean, you decide, probably thanks to my advice, to go to Caroline Ellis' workshop instead of mine or instead of Ray Mayera. And that's very funny in our connection, because you found a good way to get more public in the academic arena. As you remember, Silvia, you and I have been in contact for a long time. We know each other trajectories in Mexican sociology, even in Latin American academic perspective. And I'm glad that you at the end have found a good way to work, because I remember your problems, your personal troubles when you were trying to go into the grounded theory methodology. And I think
What do you mean?
at least, I mean,
My personal problems?
I mean your personal troubles to go through
I mean,
the
I do
grounded
have.
theory
We all have.
methodology. Remember? I remember. I mean,
Yeah.
remember. I mean, I mean, if you remember well, you invite me to go several times to Aguascalientes to have meetings in your place, in your home, and we talk for a long time, And I'm glad for you. I mean, I'm glad because at some point it is important, as Tony Adams said at the very beginning of this session, all the work that you have been doing translating autoethnography stuff. And that's pretty good. I mean, I remember also that you were all very concerned about grounded theory methodology, and even you produced in Aguascalientes one of the very first Spanish I mean, the very first Spanish book collecting different projects in grounded theory. And that's fine. I mean, I'm glad. But now that you have here some of your students, I would like to ask you, or I would like to invite you to, I mean, after recognizing your heroic, very heroic and very important labor as translator, I would like to ask you, what is your view of teaching, of training in autoethnography in Spanish-speaking countries? Why I'm asking you that? As you know, and I think you and me and other people who have been around qualitative methodologies for a long time, we are very clear that, for instance, autoethnography is very located to the American society, because the creative writing, for instance, or even for all the literature production that in America they have. One of my concerns when I'm reading in Spanish, people who is doing autoethnography, or even autoethnographical exercise, my concern is that they have no any quality as literature. I mean, in some ways, in my point of view, the autoethnographers or people who is recognizing themselves as autoethnographers have not been trained in literature, have been not training in creative writing. Even they have no any awareness of the richness of the Spanish literature. I mean, in the case of Mexico, I mean, as you probably, I recommend to the students to read Juan Rulfo, José Emilio Pacheco, or even other Latin American writers that have been producing wonderful style. In my view, this is one of my basic concerns about the production of autoethnography in Spanish-speaking countries. What is your view on that, Silvia?
Yeah, that's another story. I agree with you. We have no, people in the social sciences have no good training on writing, you know, and that goes for Mexican, for Latin America. Elda is here with me, and we taught a course together for Latin American students. And that's another big struggle. What I do, like with my undergrads, it's like a seminar, and part of the time we dedicate to reading basic stuff so that they know what autoethnography is all about. And we spend a lot of time with the writing. And we teach them basic things on writing, punctuation, grammar. I mean, we do have problems with that too. So that's another big challenge. You're right. And I took your workshop too in Long Island. I took yours and I took Caroline's and I took Bud Goodall's as well. I went through the three of them.
That's so cool. Yeah, wonderful history.
That's so
Margaret.
cool.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Anthony, but I mean, it's so cool because, I mean, I was thinking, just listening to you, Silvia, I said, when was, probably was 2002 or 2003. I remember was before ICQI start. I mean, and that was
2009, 2009.
very cool. 2009, just awesome. Thank you.
Hey,
Hi.
Margaret.
Yeah, so first I had some comments. I really identify and connect with this idea of like, we're not therapists, right? Right now in the state of Colorado, it's been a mandate. Basically, a mandate has come down from the government that we have to cover trauma in education. And of course, at the state, it always comes down to you need X amount of hours to make that happen. And I'm like, I don't think they understand, the people who are saying this understand how complex trauma is. And, you know, some of the research findings that are emerging on trauma. And now suddenly people who have no background in therapy are suddenly assigned hours to teach like trauma. So, and I oftentimes feel like just saying that, exactly what you said, like, I'm not a therapist. And sometimes I'm concerned about, I could do more damage than good, because I don't understand all the complexities of it. I mean, all of us have a certain amount of time. We have our own, you know, families, research, administrative duties. And to read that and read that well, it really does take the discipline and having gone through the academy. So I really appreciate that comment. At the same time, because I am at a small university, when I do have a PhD student come, you know, I get recommended now. People tell people Dr. Berg is actually interested in this. And occasionally I have a student reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in autoethnography. And my immediate response is, yeah, exactly. I'm like, you had me at autoethnography. I'm in. I don't care what you're writing about. You know, I will learn. You will teach me. You know, and I think that's one of the strengths of it is it has that teaching. And so there's two things also that I think one thing I really kudos to you for providing open access. Unfortunately, in the US, I think that system, and I talked about this, we're trying to get an article published on this now, like our university doesn't see that as valid publications. Right now in our system of how you get points to get your promotions, that is not valid, which seems so silly to me, because in the end, it's free. It's likely to get read quite a bit as years go by. And then my question is, like, what are some of the conversations you have with colleagues to make them realize, you know, the powerfulness, the importance of autoethnography?
That's been very hard because my colleagues are not very open to that. And they, especially ethnographers, I think they feel challenged that I'm doing things that they are the ones who know how to do. So what I have done is try to be as professional as I can. Try to come across as someone that knows more than just telling my own story. You know, I studied abroad. I have done a lot of work. I know theory. I know methodology, and I try to keep it open where I can. You know, we have seminars every middle semester and the end of the semester where students present what they have done during that time. And I try to come across as someone that knows. When they attacked me, you know, she ended up with Silvia, she's going to do autoethnography. Everybody that ends up with Silvia ends up doing autoethnography. So it's like, we wasted them. And I think as years have passed, they have come to respect it more. And as I have had really good students. I have 2 of them here. And they are very good students and they use autoethnography. So I think little by little, you know, very, I mean, that's all I can do. So I try to make it more professional, and I work hard with them to make good theses and dissertations. But dialogue with my colleagues, there's not much dialogue with my colleagues. No.
Okay.
Honestly.
No, actually, that makes me feel good, because I face kind of similar circumstances, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I think I really appreciate all the work that Tony and Caroline and Art and all of them have done, because I'm not here standing all by myself trying to convince them. You know, they know there is an international community that has done this and has done really good work. So although they have their doubts about it, they just allow me to work with students and do autoethnographic thesis and dissertations, and I really appreciate it. Like, let me give you an example. The graduate studies, the bureaucratic administration does not allow students to talk in first person. They cannot use first person when they write their dissertations. So it's like, well, how are we going to go about it? But they have accepted that if I think they can, they would allow them to. If their advisor think it is okay, then they accept. So that's a big space that opens up. So little by little, I have been doing stuff to make it come across as strong and professional as I can. Because the other thing that happens is that people who do autoethnography, sometimes I don't agree with the kind of work they do. I wouldn't consider that to be autoethnographic.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided all I can do is try to stay. I say I do evocative autoethnography as good as I can. And whatever other people do, well, you know, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
And, you know, not being a therapist, but if you teach autoethnography, or if students can come close to autoethnography, I think you do open up a space for them to deal with trauma. I have been following these people on these presentations on narrative therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a window there. You know, even if undergrads just have a couple of exercises that can allow them to express what's going on, we may be able to contribute a little bit and accept that we're not trained to do that. You know?
You know,
So
at
we're
the
almost.
sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
At the same time, I think to myself, at the obligatory years of education,
Mm-hmm.
it would be so wonderful for more teachers to provide those opportunities for students to begin to do that kind of work. At the same time, there's obstacles of that, you know, with like, you go for 50 minutes in your science classroom, and then science doesn't want to deal with this at all. Or then you go, you know, 60 minutes in your social studies class, and then 50 minutes. And so there's this very kind of siloed. And one thing I've really learned to appreciate about autoethnographic is that everyone is bringing their own little, you know, background and area to it, and their own kind of expertise.
Yeah.
And I think that, and in the US, I think it's incredibly difficult because there's so much standards now, you know, this total focus on this very narrowed curriculum, that they want this, they want to increase this trauma coverage, but at the same time, you've created a system that's so rigid below it. How are you going to make that happen?
I know. Oh, I read you. Believe me, I read you. They want us to do so much with so little, and more. Right? And they have to have it all regulated, you know, and at the same time do what they want. But it's just like you do it as you do it, and it's hard to, but they want to control it all, you know. What you teach, how many hours, how do you deal with students?
Yeah.
So
while we're, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Are you in a university or you are with?
I'm in a university, and I'm in a school of teacher education. So I usually, what's interesting, most of my PhD references come from people who've been in leadership. And so we have a really strong educational leadership program, and they know that I'm interested in autoethnography. So most of the recommendations to get me onto committees are from the leadership. And it's just fascinating to me, the number of people who come out of leadership disillusioned to a certain degree in trying to change it. And, you know, students from Hispanic backgrounds and African-American backgrounds. And this is another strength I see in autoethnography, is it allows people to express things that aren't in the dominant discourse that has traditionally valued that kind of heavy quantitative tradition, you know. But I'm really, these people kind of inspire me because they know these systems inside and out. And they do an excellent job of criticizing it from a very personal perspective.
Yeah, so you have a window there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to be mindful of time. We're getting to the end, but Silvia, I want to just say how blessed, grateful, thankful that you're in the world and all of the work that you've done. And thank you for doing this session. And it's just
thank you
an honor and pleasure to work with you always.
Same here. The same here. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for attending too. So, yeah, thank you.